The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as closed the final quarterly report, his signature still wet on documents that would reshape 3 departments by morning. Around him, the corporate tower buzzed with late-night energy, but he remained calm, calculating. What his colleagues didn't understand, what 99% of people never grasp, is that true power operates in the shadows, following principles laid down centuries ago by a Florentine diplomat who understood human nature better than perhaps any man before or since. Died in 1527, but his insights into power, influence, and strategic thinking remain as relevant today as they were in Renaissance Italy. While most people stumble through life reacting to circumstances, the Machiavellian thinker operates from a position of deliberate advantage, employing what can only be called shadow strategies, methods of advancement that remain largely invisible to the untrained eye. These are not the crude manipulations of petty office politics or the obvious schemes of amateur opportunists. They are sophisticated approaches to human interaction, decision-making, and strategic positioning that, when properly understood and ethically applied, can elevate an individual far above the common crowd. The third part of enduring wisdom reveals itself not in the obvious counsel about fear and love, but in the subtle arts of perception, timing, and calculated invisibility. Part I, the architecture of invisible influence. The most powerful people in any organization, industry, or social structure are rarely the most visible. They understand that true influence operates like the foundation of a building, absolutely essential, yet largely unseen. This principle forms the cornerstone of Machiavellian shadow strategy, the systematic cultivation of influence that others cannot easily identify, counter, or replicate. Consider the executive who never speaks first in meetings, but whose quiet questions redirect entire discussions. Watch the entrepreneur who seems to stumble into opportunity after opportunity, yet somehow always finds themselves positioned perfectly when fortune strikes. Observe the professional who advances steadily while more obviously talented colleagues plateau. These individuals have mastered what understood intuitively. That apparent effortlessness is often the result of extraordinary preparation, and that the most effective power is power that doesn't look like power at all. The foundation of invisible influence begins with information asymmetry. While others focus on what is said in meetings, the strategic thinker focuses on what is not said. They notice who defers to whom in casual conversation. They observe the micro-expressions that contradict public statements. They pay attention to patterns of behavior that reveal true priorities beneath stated objectives. This isn't about spying or manipulation. It's about developing the sophisticated observational skills that himself employed to navigate the treacherous political landscape of Renaissance Italy. Had learned this lesson early in his career when he noticed that the real decisions in his company weren't made in boardrooms, but in the informal conversations that preceded them. The executive who later became his mentor had taught him to arrive early to every important meeting, not to appear eager, but to observe the pre-meeting dynamics. Who spoke to whom? What topics were carefully avoided? Which alliances were forming or dissolving? This intelligence proved far more valuable than anything discussed in the formal session. Information gathering, however, is only the first element of invisible influence. The second element involves what's called the management of appearances. This doesn't mean deception. It means understanding that perception shapes reality in human affairs. The strategic thinker carefully curates not just what they reveal about themselves, but when and how they reveal it. They understand that timing can transform the same action from career suicide to career advancement. The art of strategic revelation operates on multiple levels. At the most basic level, it involves controlling the flow of information about your capabilities. While amateur players either hide their talents completely or display them indiscriminately, the Machiavellian thinker reveals competence strategically, at moments when it can maximum impact and minimum threat to others' egos. They understand that being perceived as competent is good, but being perceived as indispensable is better, and being perceived as threatening is dangerous. More sophisticated practitioners master the art of attributed success. Rather than claiming credit for every achievement, they ensure that their contributions are recognized by the right people at the right time. They understand that having a reputation for making others look good is often more valuable than having a reputation for personal brilliance. This approach requires considerable emotional intelligence and long-term thinking, but it creates a form of influence that is both powerful and sustainable. The third element of invisible influence involves the strategic use of reciprocity and obligation. Observed that humans are social creatures bound by complex webs of mutual obligation. The strategic thinker doesn't simply do favors. They create systems of reciprocity that naturally position them at the center of important networks. They understand the difference between transactional exchanges and relationship investments. This might involve sharing credit in ways that create gratitude or offering assistance that demonstrates competence without threatening superiority. It could mean introducing valuable connections, providing useful information, or simply being consistently reliable in ways that others come to depend upon. The key insight is that obligations created thoughtfully and gradually are far more powerful than favors demanded explicitly. Sarah, a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, this principle when she began sending weekly industry insights to key stakeholders across departments. Initially dismissed as nice-to-have communications, these reports gradually became essential reading for strategic planning. Without anyone quite realizing it, Sarah had positioned herself as a crucial information hub. When major decisions were being made, her input became not just welcome but necessary. The fourth element involves what might be called strategic restraint, the discipline to avoid exercising power when you could, in order to preserve it for when you must. Most people, when they gain any advantage, immediately seek to use it. The Machiavellian thinker understands that power unused can be more influential than power exercised. The threat of potential action often carries more weight than action itself. This principle applies across all forms of human interaction. In negotiations, it might mean having a strong alternative but not mentioning it unless absolutely necessary. In workplace politics, it could involve having damaging information about a colleague but choosing to file it away rather than deploy it. In competitive situations, it might mean having a decisive advantage but allowing opponents to maintain dignity while still achieving your objectives. The psychology behind strategic restraint is profound. When people know you could hurt them but choose not to, they often become more committed to maintaining positive relationships with you than they would be through mere transactional exchanges. This creates what intelligence professionals call voluntary cooperation. Others choose to help you because they prefer your friendship to your enmity, even though you've never explicitly threatened them. Modern technology has created new opportunities for invisible influence that could never have imagined, yet the principles remain constant. Social media algorithms can be understood and leveraged to amplify messages without obvious promotion. Professional networks can be cultivated systematically to create compound effects over time. Digital footprints can be managed to create desired impressions that influence real-world interactions. The key insight is that these tools, like all aspects of invisible influence, work best when their use is not apparent to others. The executive whose LinkedIn posts consistently surface in industry discussions hasn't achieved this through luck or obvious self-promotion, but through understanding how engagement algorithms reward certain types of content and interaction patterns. The entrepreneur who seems to have an uncanny ability to meet the right people at networking events has likely studied the behavioral patterns of their target connections and positioned themselves accordingly. Yet technology also creates new vulnerabilities for those who don't understand its implications. Digital communications leave permanent records. Online behaviors create data patterns that sophisticated observers can analyze. Social media interactions reveal relationship networks and priorities. The modern Machiavellian must understand both the opportunities and the risks inherent in our connected age. The ultimate goal of invisible influence is not manipulation, but rather the creation of genuine value that naturally positions you for advancement. The strategic thinker seeks to become someone whose success creates success for others, not through selfless altruism, but through enlightened self-interest. They understand that sustainable influence must be built on actual competence and real value creation, not merely on clever positioning. This requires what might be called earned invisibility, the right to operate with less scrutiny, because you've proven yourself trustworthy and effective. Like a master craftsman whose technique becomes so refined that difficult work appears effortless, the sophisticated practitioner of influence eventually achieves a position where their power is acknowledged but not resented, because it serves the interests of the broader system. Part II, the calculus of strategic timing. Time, understood, is not merely a dimension in which events unfold. It is a strategic resource that can be accumulated, spent, borrowed, and invested. While most people react to events as they occur, the strategic thinker operates across multiple time horizons simultaneously, positioning themselves not just for immediate opportunities, but for second and third-order effects that others cannot yet perceive. The mastery of timing operates on three distinct levels. Micro-timing, which involves the precise moment-to-moment decisions that can determine the success or failure of individual interactions. Macro-timing, which concerns the broader positioning across career arcs, economic cycles, and industry transitions. And what might be called temporal arbitrage, the ability to profit from differences in how various parties perceive the value of time itself. At the micro level, timing manifests in the subtle art of conversational dynamics. The strategic thinker understands that the same statement can produce radically different outcomes depending on when it is delivered within a discussion. They know when to speak first to establish frames of reference, when to speak last to have the final word, and perhaps most importantly, when to remain silent and allow others to reveal information or commit to positions. Consider the moment when a controversial topic arises in a group setting. Most people either jump in immediately with their perspective or mentally check out of the conversation entirely. The strategically minded individual does neither. They listen carefully to the early positions, noting not just what people say, but how they say it. Who speaks with conviction versus who seems to be testing the waters, who defers to whom, what underlying concerns emerge in the language choices people make. Only after mapping the conversational terrain do they contribute, and their contribution is calibrated not just to advance their own position, but to do so in a way that acknowledges the legitimate concerns of others while gently redirecting toward more favorable ground. This approach often results in their perspective being perceived not as one opinion among many, but as a thoughtful synthesis that others can support. James, a senior consultant at a strategy firm, had developed this skill to an art form. In client meetings where tensions ran high between different factions of the client organization, he would deliberately arrive with multiple potential solutions, but no predetermined preference. By allowing each side to present their concerns first, he could craft recommendations that addressed everyone's core issues while advancing his firm's broader engagement objectives. Clients consistently felt heard and understood, while James maintained the flexibility to adapt his approach as new information emerged. The principle extends beyond verbal communication to written correspondence, meeting scheduling, and even the timing of career moves. The strategic thinker understands that a brilliant proposal submitted at the wrong time can fail, while a mediocre proposal submitted at exactly the right moment can succeed dramatically. They develop sensitivity to organizational rhythms, industry cycles, and even the personal schedules and priorities of key decision-makers. Macro timing involves positioning yourself for opportunities that others cannot yet see. This requires developing what intelligence analysts call horizon scanning, the systematic observation of trends, weak signals, and emerging patterns that might create future advantages. While others focus on current success metrics, the strategic thinker invests time in understanding the forces that will shape tomorrow's competitive landscape. This approach demands considerable intellectual humility. It means accepting that your current expertise might become obsolete, that industries you've never considered might become relevant to your future, and that skills that seem peripheral today might become central tomorrow. It requires maintaining what cognitive scientists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt mental models as new information emerges. The technology industry provides countless examples of successful macro timing. Before cloud computing became obvious, a small number of professionals quietly developed expertise in distributed systems, data security, and subscription business models. When the transition accelerated, these individuals found themselves perfectly positioned for opportunities they couldn't have predicted in detail, but had prepared for through general principles. Similarly, professionals who recognized early that data analysis would become crucial across all industries began developing statistical and programming skills long before data science became a formal job category. They understood that information was becoming more abundant and that organizations would eventually need people who could extract insight from complexity. The key insight is that macro timing success doesn't require predicting specific futures. It requires positioning yourself to benefit from general directions of change while maintaining enough flexibility to pivot as clarity emerges. This often means developing what venture capitalists call adjacent possible skills, capabilities that are valuable in your current role, but could become extremely valuable in roles that don't yet exist. Temporal arbitrage represents the most sophisticated application of strategic timing. It involves recognizing that different parties value time differently and structuring interactions to benefit from these differences. The most obvious example involves the relationship between urgent and important tasks. While others get caught up in the urgency trap, constantly responding to immediate demands, the strategic thinker invests time in important but non-urgent activities that compound over time. This might mean spending an extra hour each week building relationships with emerging leaders in your organization, even though there's no immediate benefit. It could involve investing time in understanding technologies or market trends that aren't yet relevant to your current role. It might mean taking on projects that offer learning opportunities rather than immediate recognition. The compound effects of this approach often become apparent only in retrospect. The relationships you cultivate during slack periods become crucial during crisis moments. The skills you develop before their required position you for opportunities when they emerge. The reputation you build for thoughtful long-term thinking makes others more likely to include you in strategic discussions. Temporal arbitrage, when she spent her lunch hours during her first year at a consulting firm, attending internal presentations by partners from different practice areas. While her peers focused on billable hours and immediate project demands, she was quietly building a comprehensive understanding of the firm's capabilities and client relationships. When a major client requested a cross-functional team for a complex engagement, she was the only junior consultant with sufficient breadth of knowledge to coordinate the effort effectively. This visibility launched her career trajectory far beyond her original timeline. The digital age has created new forms of temporal arbitrage. Content creation, for instance, operates on compound time dynamics. An article, video, or social media post created today might generate value for months or years, yet most people think about content in terms of immediate engagement rather than long-term asset building. The strategic thinker approaches content creation as investment rather than expense, understanding that today's effort can create tomorrow's opportunities. Similarly, network effects operate across extended time horizons. A relationship established today might not become professionally relevant for years, yet when it does become relevant, it can be transformative. The strategic professional maintains broad networks not because every connection will prove valuable, but because some connections will prove extremely valuable in ways that cannot be predicted in advance. Modern communication technologies have compressed some time cycles while extending others. Email and instant messaging create expectations of immediate response, yet social media and professional platforms create permanent archives that can be referenced indefinitely. The strategic thinker understands these different temporal dynamics and optimizes their communication accordingly. For immediate tactical communications, they focus on clarity and efficiency. For communications that might be referenced later, they invest additional time in precision and thoughtfulness. They understand that a hastily written email might create problems for months, while a carefully crafted message might generate opportunities for years. Advanced timing strategy involves what might be called option creation, taking actions today that don't provide immediate benefits, but create future choices. This might involve maintaining relationships with recruiters even when you're satisfied with your current position, developing skills that aren't immediately relevant to your current role, or exploring industries adjacent to your area of expertise. The goal isn't to predict which options will become valuable, but to ensure that when valuable opportunities emerge, you're positioned to recognize and pursue them. This approach requires emotional discipline, because option-creating activities often feel like inefficient uses of time in the short term. Yet the compound effects can be extraordinary. The professional who maintains relationships across multiple industries is more likely to recognize when changes in one industry create opportunities in another. The individual who develops skills in adjacent areas is more likely to be considered for roles that bridge different functions. The person who understands both technical and business considerations is more likely to be trusted with responsibilities that require both perspectives. The ultimate insight of strategic timing is that time itself can be leveraged through understanding and patience. While others seek immediate gratification and quick wins, the strategic thinker builds systems that generate increasing returns over extended periods. They understand that sustainable advantage often comes not from doing different things, but from doing similar things with different time horizons in mind. This requires what might be called temporal discipline, the ability to defer immediate gratification in favor of compound benefits. It means accepting that the most powerful strategies often have delayed effects, and that the appearance of overnight success usually masks years of invisible preparation. Part III, the mastery of calculated invisibility. The highest level of Machiavellian strategy involves what appears to be a paradox, achieving maximum influence while maintaining minimum visibility. This is not about hiding or operating through deception, but rather about understanding that true mastery often manifests as apparent effortlessness. Like a master conductor whose subtle gestures coordinate complex symphonies, the strategically sophisticated individual learns to achieve disproportionate results through minimal apparent effort. Calculated invisibility operates on the principle that influence is most powerful when it appears to emerge naturally from circumstances rather than from deliberate action. When your competitors can see your moves, they can counter them. When your colleagues can identify your techniques, they can replicate them. When your success appears to result from obvious strategies, others will attempt to copy your approach, diluting your advantage. The art of calculated invisibility begins with understanding the difference between visible competence and hidden architecture. Visible competence involves the skills and achievements that others can readily observe and evaluate, your technical expertise, your communication abilities, your track record of results. These are necessary but not sufficient for sustained advantage, because they can be matched by others with enough effort. Hidden architecture, by contrast, involves the systems, relationships, and processes that enable your visible competence but remain largely unobservable to outsiders. This might include your information-gathering methods, your decision-making frameworks, your relationship maintenance systems, or your continuous learning processes. These elements are much more difficult to replicate because they're not apparent to casual observation. David, now a managing director at a major investment bank, had built his career on hidden architecture. While his peers focused on visible metrics like deal volume and client satisfaction scores, he had quietly developed what he called his intelligence system, a network of relationships across the industry that provided him with early warning about potential opportunities and threats. When markets shifted or new regulations emerged, he consistently seemed to be positioned perfectly, not through luck but through superior information flow. His colleagues saw his success but not the systematic relationship maintenance that enabled it. They observed his prescient market calls but not the diverse perspectives he collected before making them. They noted his ability to attract top talent but not the careful attention he paid to junior colleagues' career development long before they became valuable team members. From the outside, his success appeared almost magical. From the inside, it was the result of meticulous system building. The principle of calculated invisibility extends to problem-solving approaches. While others attack problems directly and obviously, the strategic thinker often finds oblique approaches that achieve the same ends with less resistance and more sustainability. Rather than confronting obstacles head-on, they look for ways to make obstacles irrelevant or to transform opposition into cooperation. This might involve reframing problems so that solving them serves multiple constituencies' interests. It could mean timing initiatives to coincide with external pressures that make change inevitable anyway. It might involve working through intermediaries who have different relationships with key stakeholders. The goal is to achieve objectives in ways that generate minimal friction and maximum acceptance. Consider the challenge of organizational change. The obvious approach involves making the case for change, presenting implementation plans, and driving adoption through authority or persuasion. This approach often generates resistance, both from those who disagree with the change and from those who resent being told what to do. The invisible approach might involve creating conditions where the desired change emerges as the obvious solution to problems that stakeholders already recognize. This could involve highlighting inconsistencies between current practices and stated values, sharing information that makes the need for change apparent to others, or creating pilot programs that demonstrate benefits without requiring organization-wide commitment. Lisa had mastered this approach when she needed to modernize her department's project management practices. Rather than proposing a new system, she began using improved methods for her own projects, sharing results that clearly demonstrated better outcomes. When colleagues asked about her approach, She offered to help them with their projects, gradually spreading new practices without formally implementing them. By the time management officially adopted the new methods, most of the department was already using them successfully. The psychology of calculated invisibility relies on fundamental aspects of human nature. People prefer to feel that they've chosen their actions rather than having actions imposed upon them. They're more likely to support initiatives they've helped develop than initiatives presented as complete solutions. They're more committed to changes they've discovered for themselves than changes they've been told to make. This insight suggests strategies that work with human psychology rather than against it. Instead of presenting complete solutions, the invisible influencer might pose thoughtful questions that lead others to discover problems and solutions themselves. Rather than claiming credit for ideas, they might plant seeds of insight that others develop and own. Instead of mandating changes, they might create environments where change becomes the path of least resistance. The digital age has created new opportunities for calculated invisibility. Social media algorithms reward consistent engagement over promotional content, meaning that genuine value creation often receives more visibility than obvious self-promotion. Professional platforms amplify thoughtful commentary more than explicit marketing. Search engines prioritize useful content over content that's obviously designed to rank well. These dynamics favor individuals who understand that indirect approaches often produce superior results to direct ones. The professional who consistently shares useful insights without obvious self-interest gradually builds a reputation that generates opportunities organically. The entrepreneur who focuses on solving customer problems rather than selling products often finds that sales increase naturally as value becomes apparent. Yet digital environments also create new challenges for maintaining invisibility. Online activities leave permanent traces that can be analyzed by sophisticated observers. Pattern recognition software can identify coordination that would have been invisible in analog environments. Social network analysis can reveal influence relationships that the participants themselves might not fully understand. The modern practitioner of calculated invisibility must therefore understand both the opportunities and the risks of digital environments. They must learn to create value online without leaving footprints that reveal their strategies. They must build influence through platforms that inherently create visibility while maintaining the strategic advantages that come from others not fully understanding their methods. This often involves what might be called distributed strategy, achieving goals through multiple channels and methods so that no single pattern becomes apparent to observers. Rather than relying on one primary approach, the invisible influencer might combine content creation, network building, skill development, and direct relationship management in ways that create compound effects without revealing the underlying design. The most sophisticated practitioners develop what intelligence professionals call operational security, systematic approaches to maintaining strategic advantages even in transparent environments. This might involve using different platforms for different purposes, maintaining separation between experimental and proven tactics, or building genuine expertise in areas that naturally create influence without requiring obvious promotion. Advanced invisibility involves understanding and leveraging what economists call externalities effects that extend beyond the immediate participants in any action. The visible operator focuses on direct results. I do X, therefore Y happens. The invisible operator focuses on systemic effects. I do X, which makes Y more likely, which creates conditions where Z naturally emerges, which eventually produces the outcome I actually wanted. This system's thinking requires patience and sophisticated mental models. It means accepting that your most important contributions might not be directly traceable to specific actions you took. It involves finding satisfaction in creating conditions for success rather than in claiming credit for success itself. The ultimate goal of calculated invisibility is not deception, but rather the creation of sustainable influence that appears natural to others, because it actually serves their interests as well as your own. The masterful practitioner becomes someone whose success makes others successful, whose advancement creates opportunities for their network, whose problem-solving approaches genuinely improve situations for all involved parties. This alignment of interests is what makes calculated invisibility different from mere manipulation. While manipulation involves advancing your interests at the expense of others, sophisticated influence involves finding ways to advance your interests through advancing others' interests. While manipulation requires secrecy because it would be opposed if it were understood, legitimate influence can often bear scrutiny because it genuinely creates value for all parties involved. The strategic professional who masters calculated invisibility becomes what network theorists call a keystone species, someone whose presence dramatically improves outcomes for their entire ecosystem. Like wolves in Yellowstone whose hunting patterns reshape entire forest ecosystems, the invisible influencer creates changes that cascade through their professional and personal networks in ways that strengthen the entire system. This creates a form of sustainable competitive advantage that becomes stronger over time rather than weaker. While visible advantages can be countered, systemic advantages become more entrenched as they prove their value to multiple constituencies. The professional who becomes essential to their network's success achieves a form of security and influence that doesn't depend on defending territory or defeating competitors. The mastery of calculated invisibility ultimately represents the highest development of strategic thinking, the ability to achieve significant objectives without creating resentment, to build substantial influence without generating opposition, and to succeed in ways that strengthen rather than threaten the systems within which you operate. It requires combining the analytical insights with the emotional intelligence to understand that sustainable power must serve broader purposes than mere self-advancement. In our interconnected age, where information flows rapidly and relationships span global networks, the principles of calculated invisibility become more rather than less relevant. The professionals who thrive over the coming decades will be those who understand how to create genuine value in ways that naturally position them for advancement, who build influence through service rather than domination, and who achieve their goals through making those goals align with the interests of others. This is perhaps most enduring insight, that the most effective power is power that doesn't need to be wielded, because it has created conditions where others voluntarily choose to act in ways that serve your interests as well as their own. The shadow strategies that allow an individual to outpace 99% of people are ultimately strategies that create value for far more than just the individual employing them. The path to such mastery requires years of development, constant learning, and the wisdom to understand that true strength often manifests as gentleness, true influence often appears as facilitation, and true success often looks like others succeeding. For those willing to think beyond immediate gratification and obvious tactics, these principles offer a path to achievement that becomes more rather than less satisfying over time. In the end, the strategic insights properly understood and ethically applied, point towards something much more sophisticated than mere political maneuvering or competitive advantage. They point toward a way of engaging with the world that creates compound benefits across multiple dimensions of life, that builds rather than exploits relationships, and that achieves personal success through contributing to systemic success. This is the true mastery that allows exceptional individuals to outpace not just their immediate competitors, but entire categories of people who never understood that the most powerful strategies operate in the spaces between obvious actions, in the timing between events, and in the subtle influences that shape how others think and act. For those who understand these principles, the question is not whether they will succeed, but rather how much good they will do in the process of succeeding. The shadows cast by Renaissance Florence still fall across our modern world, and those who understand how to navigate them continue to find advantages that others cannot see. The question that remains is not whether these principles work. Centuries of application have demonstrated their effectiveness, but rather how they will be employed by each new generation of strategic thinkers who discover them.